Robotic love. It's a phrase that maybe is funny and odd, and perhaps you've never used it, but it's an experience that I'm sure that you've had, like in your friendships, with coaches, with teachers, with coworkers, with bosses, with mentors, with pastors. You've experienced robotic love in a variety of different ways, perhaps in a dating relationship. And certainly if you're married and have been married for more than 1.3 seconds, you've experienced what we'll come to know as robotic love. Like, there's that friend, and there was a time in your life that you would have confided anything. You confided everything in them. There was this friend that you couldn't wait to have a conversation with. If you had a free hour, you would like to spend it with them. If you had a free Friday night, you wanted to hang out with them. If you got to take someone skiing for the weekend, you wanted to take them. There was this friend, maybe you were in 6th grade, maybe you were 50 years old, but for you, they just made life okay, Like anything else could happen, and because you had that relationship, because you could have those conversations, because at least they understood that issue, life was okay. And yet, here you are maybe a few days later, maybe a few years later, and you're friends on Facebook so that you can stalk them, but aside from that, you don't talk, right? Like, you watch what they're doing, but quite frankly, their skin kind of makes you, they kind of make your skin curl a little bit. You wouldn't trust them. You wouldn't confide in them. You don't see eye to eye on anything, it would seem, and you certainly wouldn't want to take them skiing. Maybe it was a coach, a mentor, some person who, when you spent time with them, you were just infused with energy. Like, you left a meeting with that boss, you left an interaction with that coach or with that teacher, and you just felt like life was okay. Like, you really did have something to contribute to the world, that you really could become a beautiful person, that you really could master whatever skill it is that you were working on. And yet today, you don't talk. And if you do, it's awkward. Or maybe it's just awkward for you, because they still feel this connection, but you just feel disagreement. You feel uncomfortable. You wouldn't want to process life with them at all. Or maybe you just leave an interaction and you're anything but encouraged. It's like the whole thing's done a 180. You're discouraged now. Maybe it was a dating relationship, a relationship that you were sure was headed for marriage. I mean, yeah, you're only in the 5th grade, but come on, right? Like, you were sure it was going there, and everyone around you was sure it was going there, and you could talk on the phone for like 5 hours, and you would hang up, and you'd be like, what did I just talk about? And you'd be like, I don't know, I'm just in love, and all your friends would make fun of you. Right? Like, you would do the silliest, most ridiculous things, and you would deny ever doing them today. Right? This is part of why we don't talk to people that we've dated in the past, because they have too much on us, right? Like, they shot too much of our patheticness. It didn't go there. It didn't end there. Maybe against your will, maybe because of you, but something that seemed to be so destined didn't happen. And in marriage, maybe you've experienced it in a marriage and you're not in that marriage anymore. Maybe you experience it in your marriage now. There was a time, right, where you just loved and trusted, and if you could go skiing, you wanted to go skiing with them, and if you could go on vacation, you wanted to go on vacation with them, and if you had a bad day at work, you wanted to process it with them. And yet that's not the case anymore. I guess the question that I'm wrestling with here and want to continue to wrestle with in this series is what happens that love becomes robotic? What causes that? What happens that a relationship where there was so much trust lacks any semblance of trust? So much confidentiality, and you would never tell them anything today. So much spontaneity and energy is so draining to you today. Like, why do relationships, and we all experience this isn't just in marriage, but why can relationships that were like the highlight of our lives so quickly deteriorate into something driven by duty and obligation and expectation? Like, why does love become robotic? That's really what we're going to explore for 6 weeks. And I can't emphasize enough a couple things. First, this isn't a marriage series, though it will be a driving example oftentimes. And so some of you might just have to bear with that. And second, I'm not coming to you as an expert on this subject, and you already know that. I just want you to know that I know that. Like, I've got plenty of exhibits in my life to demonstrate, like, I am as relationally broken as the next person. And so on this series, more so than most, which is every series, I'm going to be plagiarizing quite a bit. Here's why we're doing this series, though, is though I'm far from an expert on the idea, I do like to learn. And quite frankly, I am well aware of the fact that relationships are so central to life. I mean, if relationally you're whole, everything else can go wrong and you can be okay. And so I'm constantly just looking for new information and new insights and new observations, like help us relationally, Lord, and that's really all I'm doing. So please, if you feel patronized, that's not my deal, because I'm stealing this stuff. Andy Stanley, a guy named Henry Townsend, indebted to those guys. Won't give you any more references because then you'll be less impressed with me, but just kidding. Also, it's not about marriage. You know, like maybe you're someone that you're not married, but you were. Or maybe you're someone that you're not dating, but you have. And I think part of the opportunity for you is to step back and in a guilt-free, shame-free way to just kind of analyze and go, okay, what was my responsibility in that? Not in a way that like causes any unnecessary pain, but just in an honest way, like I still don't understand why that relationship ended that way. Maybe there'll be some insights. Because what we're going to study is robotic love, which is essentially an absence of intimacy, how that happens. Maybe you're a student. The good news for you is, first of all, don't date till you're 18. That's 1 point. I'm just kidding. But maybe you're a student. The deal is, and I know you get sick of hearing this because like your parents have told you this since you were like 3 years old, and we all heard it, and most of us don't do it, but you've heard this idea like, learn from my mistakes so you don't have to make them yourself, blah, 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 right? We all go, yeah. And there's like 3 people on the whole planet who have done that successfully. But I'm going to say on this series, like, here's a chance. Because many of us who are married, we've been in relationships, particularly romantic relationships, a lot of this stuff we're going to leave with homework. We're going to leave convicted and challenged and at times things to confess and stuff to deal with. You don't necessarily have to do that. Like, you can take it in and you can analyze your own relationships and you can kind of apply it. And frankly, I'm excited for you because you can get a step ahead of maybe, I know for me, where I was when I was your age. And maybe it's not about relationships, romantic relationships at all. Maybe what's at the forefront of your mind is a relationship with a boss, a relationship with coworkers, or a relationship with a parent, or something like that. I think there's opportunity there too. Maybe you're somebody who's just had the really bad luck of like your last 4 bosses have been the biggest jerk in the world. And their last like 6 jobs in the last 3 years have been the worst jobs in the world. And your last, like every job you get, the employees are just jerks. I guess what I'm getting at is maybe there's some relational dysfunction in you. I mean, maybe you didn't, like maybe you're not just so unlucky that you always get hired by the worst boss in the world. Maybe you're hard to get along with. Maybe every group of employees that you've ever worked with aren't unworthy. Maybe there's stuff in you. And so I think there's this opportunity to look at that and just understand, like, how do I relate to people in a way that allows intimacy to happen? Maybe you're married, which is a lot of you. And not for a second do I want to give the impression that the assumption that I'm making is that all our marriages stink and thus you need me, so come to church and we'll indoctrinate you with information. That is not my posture. I do believe, though, that if you have a good marriage, if you have a great marriage, then I don't have to tell you that marriage is a lot of work. And we need resources. And so to that end, I guess what I'm hoping to do is just put a quiver in your belt. I just mixed 2 metaphors, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? I'm just trying to give you more resources to relationally be even better. So big idea. This morning is going to be very introductory. If you love Bible studies, then you'll hate this morning. And if you don't like the Bible, then you'll love this morning, because we're going to spend very little time in the Bible, because what I'm going to do is kind of introduce this concept that we'll spend the next several weeks unpacking. But here's really the, if you will, the thesis that I want to lay out in front of you. And I don't have a verse to point to it. I just have some resources and some research and just some ideas, and I'm just going to leave you wrestling with this. And throughout the week you can disagree, but that'd be helpful if you didn't tell me that you did, because then my ego would be hurt. I'm just kidding. So, big idea is this, that every one of us, when we enter into a relationship, we enter into that relationship with desires. It's true of your coach, it's true of your teacher, it's true of your college, it's true of your boss, it's true of someone you date, it's true of your best friend, and it's certainly true of a spouse. In every relationship, we enter into it with desires. And what I want to suggest to you is the catalyst to robotic love, to sterile, absent, cold, bland, unfulfilling relationship, is when those desires morph from desires to expectations. That when the desires we have, God-given, justified, totally fine, whatever, when the desires we have become expectations, then intimacy becomes impossible. I think it's true in your friendships. Like, when you desire to spend a weekend with a particular friend and you're in the 8th grade, that's okay. When that becomes an expectation, friendship's over, isn't it? Or at least the beginning of the end has started. It's certainly true at work. When you have desires for the way your boss would treat you and interact with you, fine. When you develop expectations, when you allow those desires to become expectations, you will very quickly no longer like your boss and he will become demonized. It's true of coaches, it's true of pastors, it's true of churches, it's true of every relationship we have, and it's certainly true in marriage. Like when we enter into a marriage, we have desires, don't we? We've got a whole bunch of desires. We have recreational desires. Like what are we going to do? And will we do it together, or will we do it separate, and do we all have to have the same desires, and do we have to recreate like by playing basketball, or can we do something that's actually fun, like ski or snowboard or something like that? Like we have recreational desires. Stay. We have holiday. We have desires that centered around holidays, don't we? We talked a lot about this on Christmas Eve. We have desires about, like, what about Santa Claus? Will we talk about him? Will we not talk about him? When will we open gifts? And whose house will we open gifts at? And who will we go where? What house will we go to on the holidays? And how much money will we spend on gifts? You have desires on holidays. You have spiritual desires, hopes, dreams. Isn't that an enormous Bible? It's my travel Bible. You have spiritual desires. Like, do you have to agree with your spouse spiritually? Can you go to two separate churches? Who decides which church you go to? I mean, do you have family quiet times? Do you pray before meals? You have desires centered around spirituality. You have desires centered around your house. Like, when will you buy one, and will you buy one, and how many will you buy over the course of your life, and will you buy one house and live in it for the rest of your life and like raise your kids there and die there, or will you flip houses and succinctly get bigger and nicer houses and eventually, have a dream house? And within the house, like, who does what? You have desires and hopes and dreams about who will mow the lawn and who will paint when paint needs to be done, and who will do the dishes and who will do the laundry and who will cook the food, and whose responsibility is it to vacuum, and what about that junk drawer? Who has responsibility for that, right? Like, we have desires when it comes to our homes. We have desires financially. Who's going to make how much, and how much do we need to make, and who decides how we're spending it, and how much are we going to give all? We have calendar desires, right? Like, what are we going to do? Do we meet up at home at 6 o'clock, or do we meet up at home at 10 o'clock? Are we two ships passing in the night? I mean, how are we going to calendar our lives? We have desires about kids. How many will we have? Will we have any? How long? How will we raise them? Men, you have desires about what your wife won't wear to bed. Don't you? And ladies, you have desires related to that too. Your desires are that he'll just love you for who you are. Your desire is that he doesn't care what you wear to bed. He just wants you to be comfortable, right? Like, we have desires, each and every one of us, and that's okay. But at some point, what happens is our desires, they take on a different form. And maybe it's when you're walking back down the aisle at the wedding. Maybe it's when you show up on campus for the first day. I'm mixing metaphors. Maybe it's in the first 6 months of marriage. Maybe it's in the first year of marriage. But at some point, we take all of our desires and we put them in a different category. In fact, what we do is we dump them on people. We dump them on coaches. We dump them on friends. We dump them on our spouse. We dump them on our boss. We dump them on employees. And they cease to become desires, and they become expectations. And no longer is it something that I hope, something that I wish, something that I desire. It's something you owe me. Because I'm your wife. Not anybody's wife, by the way. Because I'm your husband. Because we've been friends for 5 years. Because we've always done that on that weekend. Because I'm your son. Because I'm your father. When desires become expectations, the entire relationship morphs. And for reasons that I'll try to draw out in just a moment, what I want to submit to you is at that juncture, relationship becomes impossible. Intimacy becomes impossible because we are just two business partners servicing one another's debt. Now, when this happens, there's a few things we can do, and we do. We do it in marriage, we do it in friendships, we do it at work, we do it recreationally, we do it. We can leave. And when we leave, we just say, like, you're not a good coach, you're not a good teacher, you're not a good friend, you're not a good business owner, you're not a good leader, you're not a good boss, you're not a good husband. You don't measure up to what a good husband is. And so what we do is we say, I'm going to take my expectations and I'm going somewhere else. And we go looking for a new friend, a new spouse, a new boss, some poor sap that we can dump our expectations on. We can leave. You've done it. I've done it. We can just leave. The other option is we can lose, or we can win. Now, have you ever noticed how in a relationship, one party typically is stronger-willed than the other? I'm usually the less strong-willed one. You're not supposed to laugh. Ever notice that? And particularly in marriage, one party just loses. They just go, okay, if that's what it means to be a good wife, if that's what I have to do for there to be peace in this house, if that's what I have to do to get treated with respect, I'll lose. Ladies, the way I hear you talk about this is I'll just shut off desire. I'll just stop wanting things. I'll just become numb. I'll become the good stereotypical Christian wife who submits and doesn't want anything. I'll just stop wanting. You lose is what you choose to do. You just choose to give up. You wave the white flag and, okay, tell me what your definition of a good husband is, and I'll be that. Tell me what your definition of a good employee is, and I'll be that. The danger, according to the stuff that I've listened to and studied, is that what people will tell us is people can't sustain that because it's not stressful for me to be me, but it's stressful for my wife to be me. It's not difficult for you to be you, but it would be difficult for me to be you, and that's what's happening in that interaction. Some of you know, if you've been married, you know what I'm talking about because this is so common. We just hung out with a couple months ago, and this was so what was going on. Let's see, about 5 years ago, my wife came home from a day that she spent with a couple friends. One, Jessica, who we met in early January, and she looked at me and she said, I've been miserable for a couple years in marriage. It wasn't because I was beating her up. It wasn't because I was doing any of the stereotypical stuff. It was because I just won. And I demanded that she line up her definition of being a wife to my definition of a wife. And she thought she was doing the right thing. And her friend looked at her and said, that's not what Jesus means by sacrificing yourself. That's actually selfish. Because it's easier for you to play the game than it is to be truthful and have the hard conversations and be real and candid. It's easier to pretend like you're happy than it is to have the hard conversation. And the room is like painfully silent because we all know exactly what I'm talking about. And what the experts say is you can't sustain that over a lifetime. And perhaps this then is why we see so many marriages ending in the late 30s, early 40s. Because at some point, and I think more so now than 30 years ago. 30 years ago, there wasn't the opportunity to just go like, this is dumb, I'm not doing this anymore. I'll go get my own job and I'll go start my own life. Right? Like we can all think of aunts and uncles and grandparents and parents who one person lost and they just decided they were going to live their life out in that arrangement. But it's not happening that much anymore. And in the early 40s, people go like, I'm done. I'm not going to be defeated anymore. Third option is you can compromise. Isn't this like lighthearted, warm, fuzzy stuff? Sorry. Third option is you can compromise. Now I want to mess with your paradigms a little bit because if you're anything like me, you've spent your whole adult life thinking that compromise, the key to successful relationship is compromise. I want to challenge that for just a second. Because what I want to suggest to you is when we say we compromise, really what we're saying is I'm going to hang on to my expectations. And you hang on to yours. And then we'll do this weird, awkward, unpredictable little dance where some days I'm in a better mood and so I'll try to meet your expectations, and other days I'm in a bad mood so you better figure out that you better meet my expectations. And what we do is we each hang on to our expectations. It's still really about us. But what we say is, well, we're just going to compromise. I'm going to have my desires or my expectations, you're going to have yours, and we'll kind of meet in the middle. Does that sound more like a business partnership than a relationship? Like does that sound more like a debtor? You owe me. You owe me. Wait, you owe me. No, you owe me. Like, does that sound way more like a mortgage than it does a marriage? Like, what if that's actually far from God's best? Because what if friendships are a gift? Like, what if love is a gift? And when you're simply doing what you're expected to do you get credit for that? If you're expected to have dinner ready when you get home, when your husband gets home, do you get credit for loving him in that? If you're expected have a certain level of provision for your family? Do they feel loved when you do that? Like what if compromise actually isn't God's best? Consider, I was thinking about this on Thursday and see if I can make sense of it, but in Ephesians 2, for me, what would be my favorite summary of the gospel in the entire Bible, I think, Paul said, he's speaking to a community of people, God saved you by his grace when you believed. And you can't take credit for this. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. I mean, central to what it means to be a Christ follower is to agree with this notion that people can't earn God's love. That we'll all fail at that task. That a relationship with God isn't earned, and it's really not deserved. It's something God gives. It's a gift. So central to, many of you would die, literally. You would take a bullet for the truth that the gospel and a relationship with God is a gift. I guess what I'm wondering is if it extends then to relationships in general. Like, are relationships a gift? Is love a gift? And the moment at which he better come over and watch the game with you, does it cease to be a gift and become much more of a business transaction? Think of it this way. When's the last time you've received a letter from your mortgage lender thanking you for paying your mortgage on time every month for the last 2 years? Or when's the last time you received a phone call from your mortgage lender just saying, hey, Adam, I just want you to know that we're just grateful that you're doing what you said you would do, and we're just so grateful, and they just go on and on. Like, when's the last time you've talked to a live person about your mortgage, right? Or got this letter and you open it up and it's clearly been bathed in perfume and it's got this lacy writing and you read it and it says, Dear Adam, I just want to thank you for paying your mortgage on time, and we're just so grateful that you pay your mortgage on time every month, that in here is a gift certificate for $100 for you and your wife to go out to dinner because we're just grateful that you're fulfilling your contract. And we don't know what your kids like, but if you tell us what they like, we'll give you a gift certificate for them too, and we'll send that next month. When's the last time you've got one of those? Or a phone call. In fact, you know how to get a phone call? You know what you need to do to get a live person to call you? Stop doing what you're supposed to do. And I'm not trying to throw mortgage lenders under the bus. I'm saying that's not their job. It's a business relationship. It's a debtor relationship. You've said, here's my obligations. They've said, here's their obligations. But when you were dating, you weren't drawing up contracts. In the early stages of that friendship, you weren't drawing up contracts. We'll do this once a month or else you can be mad at me. You'll do the dishes every time. That's not a relationship. Here's the problem. Is desires are real. What I'm suggesting is that when desires, no matter how justified they are, no matter how justified they feel, when desires become expectations, love becomes robotic. Because intimacy can't happen there. You don't have intimacy with the government. You don't have intimacy with your mortgage lender. Why? Because those are contracts. Those are debtor relationships. Now, by the way, this is not going to be one of those series where what I'm going to say as the Caucasian male, submit. Just die to your desires. I don't think God teaches that. I don't think it's at all anywhere close to who he is. I don't know about you, but there's desires that I have that I can't get rid of. And I haven't found a prayer that I can pray or a button I can push that'll get rid of desires. Many of your desires are God-given. They are founded and given to you from him. Your desire to matter, your desire to be respected, to be cherished, to be listened to be loved. Those desires are all very, very legitimate. What I'm saying to you is, what if when they become expectations, the relationship's over? Because you can't have intimacy with a contract. When they become expectations, things come to a screeching halt. That's kind of the question. What if robotic love is about desires becoming expectations? Now, one question would be, okay, so how would I know that? How do I know if my desires in a friendship, with a coach, with a teacher, with a school, how do I know if my desires have become expectations? And I think the most practical thing I would suggest to you is simply your expressions of gratitude. If you're grateful, and if you're expressing that gratitude. Maybe early in your marriage you desired to be an entrepreneur. Your desire was to be an entrepreneur, and your husband or your wife has stood by you despite all the stress and all the tension and all the way it affects your mood when you come home from work. They've stood by you in that. If you can't remember the last time you thanked them, and I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but just to point out, then that desire has become an expectation. Maybe you have a craft that you don't get paid for, and you love to do that craft. Maybe you're an artist. Maybe you play video games. Maybe you're a musician. And you desire to do that, and your spouse gives you all kinds of room to do that. If you can't remember the last time you've thanked them for carving out that time to let you do that, then that desire has probably become an expectation. Maybe you're kind of traditional in your gender role views. And your desire was for a wife who would have dinner on the table and a clean house and everything put away, even though she had her own job. And if you can't remember the last time you thanked her for doing that, then you have a desire that's become an expectation. Maybe quite the opposite. Maybe when you started in your marriage, it was much more like, hey, we're kind of in this together, and the kids aren't just her responsibility, and the house isn't just mine. Like, if there's dishes to be done, then no one sits on the couch till the dishes are done, and if there's cooking that needs to be done, then like first one that has the time cooks. And maybe you have much more of a messy kind of dual role marriage. If you can't remember the last time you've expressed gratitude for that, then that desire has become an expectation. Desires becoming expectations makes love robotic. That's what I'm suggesting. It's true in your relationship with God. No more sure way to become a cold-hearted legalist at best than to just simply respond to God's expectations for you. But to see him as a God who desires you and desires you to honor him and to love him totally will change the relationship. So over the next several weeks, what we're going to do is have a conversation about how do we move stuff from here to there. Like, how do we take our expectations, God-given, valid, okay, and put them back in the desire box? The homework I have for you this week is this, and I'm gonna put it in a marriage question. And if you're not married, I'm just kind of invite you to apply it to whatever relationship you're working on. But what does your husband owe you? What does your wife owe you? Now, we all know the academic answer to that. We could all spout it off very, very quickly. I'm not asking for that. I'm saying in your heart. What do they owe you? Do they owe you a clean house? Do they owe you the ability to drive a certain... What do they owe you? That, I'm suggesting to you, is the intimacy block. I think you could apply this to your employer, to your relationship with your parents, all across the board. What do they owe you? Now, if you're someone that's here and relatively new to understanding the gospel and who Jesus is, and maybe you're someone that's always been a really cerebral, really difficult thing to understand, I just want to close with a comment there. Like, the gospel is a God who has a gift called forgiveness. It's nothing you earn. It's nothing you deserve. It's a gift. And frankly, you're not obligated to receive it. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences, but you're not obligated to. The whole gospel hinges upon relationship with God is a gift. Love is a gift. Maybe you're at this place where you're like, okay, that makes some sense. In a moment, I'm going to invite people to bow their heads and just kind of process for a moment before I close this up in prayer. And all you need to do is, in that time, just tell God, like, yeah, geez, I want that gift. We would call that salvation, which is way too much of a complicated word for just simply like, God, I want a relationship with you. So let's just bow our heads, close our eyes. I'll close this up. You can talk to God about whatever it is you're thinking. Someone who wants to receive God's gift, talk to him about that. God, relationships are such a remarkably beautiful and yet trying thing. And so we say thank you. Thanks for marriage. Thanks for friendship. Thanks for mentoring relationships. Thanks for parents. Thanks for children. Thanks for relationships, God. And to unravel all of this in 30 minutes or even a day would be entirely impossible. And yet I pray that you just help us catch ourselves. That when we find ourselves relationally sideways, that maybe our first checkpoint, our first check valve would be, wait a minute, has a desire become an expectation? God, I pray that you'd make us a relationally whole people, not because we're perfect, but because we're students and we're constantly trying to better understand your design. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.